This is SDN Cast 126, and we are tonight with Maart Verstam. That's me, Fanny Reinders, and Gerald Versluit. But we have a special guest tonight, and that's Ria Bhatia, I think.
Mhm.
And she's going to talk about Azure AKS and Virtual Kubelet, and there's a lot to talk about tonight.
Good evening.
Hello.
Hello.
How are everyone?
Yeah,
How
we have
are
a special
everyone?
guest tonight.
It's a group name, man. Come on.
Okay, good.
You heard me pause for a second to double check my grammar. It compiles. I've got a pass. I'm South African.
Yeah, at least you're half English speaking,
Half English speaking.
half Dutch, half English.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we've got a special special person on the show today, Ria Bhatia. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yeah, Ria Bhatia. You got it.
Welcome to our SDN cast.
Thanks.
What episode is it now, Gerald? Martin?
126.
126.
Almost, over 2 years in now, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot of casts.
Every week.
Every week.
Every week we do a cast. It's fun. We get together. Then we barbecue afterwards. No, I'm joking.
I was like, it seems like you're in different spaces.
We can actually make it with green screens. We can actually make it all on one screen, on one space.
Fun.
But in any case, welcome to the show. You are here obviously to talk about Azure and the stuff in Azure, specifically Virtual Kubelet and AKS.
Mm-hmm.
But before we start, maybe just give us a little introduction about yourself, where you're at now, and and then floor is yours.
Cool. Yeah. So my name's Ria Bhatia. I am a PM, a program manager in Azure Compute, so within Microsoft. And I've been here for about 1.5 years now, so not too long. Before Microsoft, I was in college, so it's really been like a short time in the industry. But it's been really exciting to see how the open source initiatives in Microsoft have grown, and what we're doing to change that in the Kubernetes landscape and stuff like that. So if you ever go to KubeCon and see us at the booths, it's been kind of crazy in the past couple of years. I think the first one we went to in Austin, you could really see people starting to be like, wow, it's Microsoft. Why are they at a Kubernetes conference? What are they doing here? But now in Seattle, I think we had one of the busiest booths probably there. So that just goes to show how many people are finally, I guess, taking it seriously.
Exactly.
Hopefully.
Also about in Azure, how many technologies that's not that's Linux based, it's running in Azure versus the Windows based stuff. It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, in Azure, we really don't care about whether you're Windows or Linux. I mean, we're literally here to sell you cores, and it doesn't matter what operating system you use or what technology you want to use on top of it. We're literally just trying to sell cores.
So that's the business model, selling cores.
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now we all know. Is your background always been containers and orchestrators?
I mean, I guess not. What happened was I decided to be a computer science major in college. Because in high school, I realized it was something that I liked, and I liked the logic of coding and kind of the puzzle aspect to it. So I did that in college, did all the basics of just coding distributed systems and computer engineering and computer architectures and things like that, super basic stuff. But in my internships, that's when I was actually, I guess, exposed to what Linux was. First of all, I walked into Microsoft for the first time, I think it was actually this building or the building across from here, 5 or 6 years ago. And I had no idea what Linux was, but I ended up being on the Linux team in Microsoft. It was called the Open Source or OSTS, Open Source Center something. We did the Windows Server version for Linux. So it was interesting. I had no idea what that meant, but we basically made networking providers for every single Linux distribution. So I got to know the differences between Debian and RHEL and things like that. So it was cool.
Amazing. And
Yeah.
when did this whole virtual kubelet project start? Have you been there from the start, or did you jump in?
Yeah, I was the one that released it with the team, of course. So we all released it.
It's quite
But
new,
yeah,
right?
huh?
It's quite new then, right?
It is. It's only a year old. So it was released so a year ago in December. So it's been a year now, a year and a month that it's been out in the open. But before that, it was called the ACI connector. It only worked for ACI, and it was written in TypeScript. And this was kind of Brendan's baby project to figure out how we could combine Azure Container Instances, because that was a service that had just been built with Azure Container Service. We didn't have AKS at the time. We were building it.
So if you say ACI, it's Azure Container Instances, right?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Azure Container Instances. So that's kind of the premise of why at least Azure invested in a project like Virtual Kubelet. So I can explain like what Azure Container Instances are. They're basically just pods that spin up and down on demand. And you as a customer, you don't see any of the underlying infrastructure. So you're billed per second, you get to choose the amount of cores and the amount of memory that you want in that specific container. But you don't have to actually manage anything past that, which is really useful for a lot of customers. They don't want to have to like have these VMs lying around. They want to be able to automatically spin out containers and spin them down like on the fly. So that's what that kind of enables. And then, yeah.
So I see it's like, so like VMs, you are charged per the hour. And then if you use ACI, is it also, what is the billing there?
It's by the second.
Okay.
And I think in Azure, we released like by the minute or by the second billing for VMs. But it's definitely more heavyweight if you're in the container world. Like if you're using a VM with a container, you have to like pave technology on top of that, like Docker, and then you have to figure out how to create containers and deploy them. In this case, all you do is you say AZ create container, and you give it a container image, you give it a name, you give it the ports you want it to be exposed on. You can say you want it to be private or public, which means you can get like a private IP or a public IP, or no IP at all. So it's just really lightweight to get all of that networking figured out without you having to do any of it.
I see it. So it's like the app service for
containers.
Containers. Okay. So it's like point and click, and there we go.
If you're getting started with containers, like we tell you to use ACI first. It's kind of like the first step to get you used to it, because it's really like low barrier to entry, and you can get like a Hello World application running in like 30 seconds.
So initially when I was working with the ACI stuff, when it just came out, and I was like, okay, you can do a container, just a container, run it. For me, it wasn't a really big deal until I see the benefits now with the virtual kubelet thing. You can actually hook it up and actually have a transparent kind of an orchestrator bursting effect. Which little do you want to go a little bit in detail how that works, maybe?
Yeah. So basically, before we had like Azure Container Service, we were building Azure Kubernetes Service to just work with Kubernetes rather than the other orchestrators. And then we also had ACI. So with the kind of the ease of use of ACI, but also people wanted the orchestration power of Kubernetes. So they didn't want to handle like when their pods need to spring up, when they need to come down, like the service routing and everything like that, service discovery. You don't necessarily want to do that yourself or build your own orchestrator. You just want to use Kubernetes. So we bridged those together with Virtual Kubelet. And before we had the ACI connector, which did bridge them together, it just it only worked for Azure. And I think that was the biggest part, was that it was just us, and it was only like our concept to use it in our cloud. But we were like, if we want to make this a standard, and if we want other people to understand this more easily, we need to get more people involved in the project. So that's why we made it a pluggable community project. So now we house about 12 providers in Virtual Kubelet, from Amazon to Huawei to Alibaba. HashiCorp was the latest one that just made a Nomad provider. So, and we also even have like IoT edge providers. So now like Kubernetes becomes this model where Kubernetes is the thing you interact with, but the way and what you spin out to doesn't really matter. It's like this abstraction on top of that. So you can abstract away like a satellite, for example, in the sky, and spin out workloads to the satellite through Kubernetes. And you already know how to use Kubernetes. So spinning out to that satellite actually as a user isn't difficult anymore. Or like a data center underwater, or things like that. Like you can start to hook up like all these different technologies and have this common abstraction.
So you can totally do like multi-cloud and on-prem bursting depending on things that happen.
Yeah, you can do that. The networking. So the only thing with all of this is like the networking is going to be really wonky.
Yes.
If you know how to do that, like go for it. But those aren't use cases, for example, that Azure's trying to solve, or maybe Amazon's trying to solve. But it's something that I think like users should definitely like try if they can get VNet peering to work, or like however they can get it to work in Kubernetes, it'll work with Virtual Kubelet.
Cool. Do you have something to show us?
Yeah. So something that we worked really hard on, and like I've done Flash. So in my first year here, I did a lot of Flashy demos, and you can actually go to YouTube and type DevOps and socks. And I have this like
DevOps
little
and
YouTube.
Socks.
Yeah. I have like literally 6 episodes up, and one of the episodes is like me and Jess Rizal like on a bench, or like on the swingy bench, or a swing. I think that's just a swing, at KubeCon Austin. But I haven't necessarily figured out what to do with the YouTube channel since, so that's why you don't see anything like recent on it. But
creating it.
yeah, like I created it, and I like made some cool like demos and put those up there. But I don't know if that's necessarily what I want to do going forward, but like go ahead, look at the channel. It has some stuff from before. So yeah, what I do want to show you, and I should have asked this before. How do I use Google products?
So let's give you a one-on-one how to use Google products. On the left-hand side, there's a sort of a screen share button. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
This is not Teams.
Yeah. Awesome. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to show you what me and the team have worked really hard on in this past probably like 6 months. So virtual node. So there's this thing. So we have Virtual Kubelet, first of all. And that's kind of the pluggable community project. But all of those bits that we've created in Virtual Kubelet, we've ported to Azure and AKS. So now it becomes really easy for you to spin out to ACI and have this thing called a virtual node show up in your cluster. So one thing that we forgot to maybe go over is the fact that whenever you spin out a virtual kubelet into your cluster, it just looks like a node. So the way that Kubernetes looks at it is like a node, and the way that you look at it is like a node. So the way that you spin out to it is going to be the same thing. You'll still use node affinities, you'll still use taints and tolerations to be able to spin out to it. And like node selectors and things like that, like all of those remains the same. It's just a different node type, if you will. So this is what we've done. If you go ahead and go to Kubernetes services, and then you go and click add. And I mean, I think it's really cool because I know how much work, and I think for users of Kubernetes, you'll understand like how much work it is to create your own cluster, but it was also a lot of work to create your own virtual kubelet from scratch. So you have to like get in all the Azure bits, you have to figure out your service principles, but not only that, we also added networking into it. So then you have to like create your own subnets, and you have to like make sure they were empty and they worked for ACI and AKS. And that's where people get mostly tripped up. So we made sure that like you could literally click maybe 3 buttons in here and have a cluster with all of that configured, and a virtual network that was usable. So I'm gonna go, these are like all my resource groups. It's a lot. And, well, actually, that's my subscription. I'm gonna go here and we're gonna basically just create a new cluster. So I'm gonna put them in Ria portal test. Actually, KubeCon Seattle. Okay, still using that resource group. And then I'm gonna put Ria user 1. That should work. And we're in a bunch of regions, as you can see. So you can really be anywhere you want. I cannot spin out to West US because I'm internal, so I'm gonna go to East US. But as a user, like you guys should be able to spin out there. It's just because it's a huge region.
Is this virtual kubelet things only in US available, or is it also available in Western Europe?
Yeah, it's available in West Europe. It's available in North Europe. So the way that the regions work is that if ACI has built out that region and they have VNet support, then we'll support virtual node kind of automatically. So that's the thing that we're looking at here is like we can try, for example, it won't show up if it's not available in the region. So like Australia East, we're in Australia East, but I can't spin out to Australia East because I'm an internal user. So yeah, whatever regions, if you just click on it, if this virtual nodes preview shows up, that means it's in that region. If it doesn't, we'll just have it disappear. So it's not available. So you can't even click it or get confused about like why it's like blanked out for you. So I'm gonna go to ECUS because that works for me. Go to authentication. I'm gonna enable RBAC, and then this is the networking part. So this is what I think is really cool too. We're basically
just go a step back. What is RBAC for the guys that's
RBAC? So basically, it's the way that you can authenticate different like Kubernetes resources to be able to like contact I guess like your host and things like that. That was like an awful explanation. So I'm going to be honest, as a Microsoft user, I don't actually need like to keep my stuff super secure, if that makes sense, because we end up, and we're actually the worst at this. This is kind of like a weird tidbit. We're the worst at like authentication and security within our own teams. And I think it's something that we need to get better at. So shout out to our teams. We have shared subscriptions before because we get away from this stuff. But what we really should do is authenticate ourselves and become like allowable users within the cluster. So I should say like this user is allowed to use this cluster and they basically are able to use like this resource or this namespace. So that's kind of what like RBAC to a user can do. But you can also do it at like the components level.
And for this, it's important to flick it on, right?
Yeah, I would definitely flick it on. As much as I say that we like are awful at this, like we always put it on. But we also make it easy for you to make sure that your stuff, like your tiller and like things are all RBAC enabled. But you do have to like add a security account to allow that and things like that. So that's like probably a whole nother talk that we could do on RBAC.
RBAC standing for role-based access control. So you individual users on it, you just appoint a role to it.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
I'm gonna hide that.
There is a quick question from one of the viewers, actually. I think it's back to a little bit before, but he says, if I'm understanding correctly, the virtual kubelets via ACI can integrate with AKS. So the ACI container will show up as a new node in AKS?
Yes, exactly. I'm going to show that to you. Yeah, so that's what this virtual node thing did. So it's in preview. And now that we've enabled it, we're going to, when we go ahead and like get credentials, but I already have a cluster with it. When we go and do that, we'll actually see 3 nodes. So I know my node count right now is 2, but I'm going to have 2 like physical VMs in my cluster, and then I'm going to have 1 virtual VM. So I actually have 3 by enabling this.
Do you need to have 2 physical nodes, or can you do like 0 physical nodes?
The least you can do today is 1. And the reason because for that is, first of all, we haven't made like a cluster that can scale down to 0 yet for Azure. Second of all, virtual node actually runs. So virtual node behind the scenes is just a pod in Kubernetes.
I see.
That's all it is. So the way you debug a pod in Kubernetes is you look through the logs. So that's just a hint. If there's something wonky with your virtual node, go to the actual container behind it. That's going to be on the other VM, and go through the logs there, because that will most likely give you your answer for what's going on. We have a lot of things spitting out to say like all these things are getting registered. So definitely look there. But in the future, we do want to spin down to 0 nodes. And when we do that, we're going to move virtual node to our control plane. So the pod itself, like just like the other kube system pods, would move over to us. And then we would possibly allow you to just spin out like container instances and things like that. So you might just have like virtual nodes showing up, but in reality, you have nothing running. So you're not being billed for anything, but you can spin out automatically.
Cool. That's brilliant.
Yeah. So that's kind of the future of it. But we're working on a lot of stuff. So we'll see when that one comes through. Yeah. Okay. So authentication. Okay. Networking. So with networking, so there's this HTTP application routing thing. You can go ahead and enable it. It's just an add-on, but actually I won't even talk about it because it's not like, it's an ingress controller, but you guys can go ahead.
And is it optional to put on? Or
yeah, it's optional. So if you don't want to like add, create your own ingress controller, or create your own service, like, and then just take the IP and put it for your front end. Like if you don't want to create your own Nginx, like you can just use this.
Okay.
But yeah. So these are all, that's kind of like what we call add-ons in AKS. We have a bunch of them. The way that we install Virtual Kubelet or Virtual Node is actually through the add-on system. So it's like an optional configuration for you. But that's kind of too detailed. You probably don't need to know that, but it's a fun fact. So in this case, for this virtual network, what we actually do is we create a whole new virtual network for you. So this is KubeCon Seattle VNet 247. It creates a cluster subnet for me. It creates a virtual node subnet. The hardest thing is honestly figuring out like what ranges are possible and what ranges fit for you. We kind of default everything to what we think is best. But if you have your own virtual network, like they'll all show up here too. So you can go ahead and use an existing one. But you do have to be careful and make sure that your cluster subnets are empty, especially this virtual node one. So this virtual node subnet is actually just a subnet for all your container instances that get spun up. It has to be empty. There has to be you couldn't have put like a VM in it and then deleted the VM. You have to actually like go in and delete this service association link. It's super complicated right now. We're working on fixing that. But this is like the biggest thing that customers say is like deleting this subnet is so difficult, or deleting the VNet from the cluster is difficult because of that region.
Okay, cool.
And then, so we have the service address range, the DNS IP address range, and those are all defaulted.
What is the Docker breach address?
Honestly, I'm not too sure. Let's see. We can read the little tidbit. This is where the tidbits come in handy. An IP address and a net mask assigned to a Docker bridge. It must not be in any subnet IP ranges or Kubernetes service address range. We could probably look it up or ask someone. But
if anyone watching the show knows about
if you
Docker,
know,
just ping us.
It's like some things that I don't want to know about. I'm like, I just one day I'm sure it'll become useful and I'll be like, I wish I had learned that before, but cool. So we've also integrated Azure monitoring with Virtual Node. So automatically you'll start to get logs and metrics from not only like the containers that are in your cluster or running on actual VMs in your cluster, but also from Azure container instances. So it'll seem like one seamless experience rather than the fact that you're running like containers in two different services, which is actually what's happening. So yeah, and then you can just go ahead and review and create, and that's really it. So I'm going to jump to terminal, but I'm going to pause. You guys have any questions?
I don't have any specific questions. How long does it take to provision such a cluster? Because
a cluster today, about 7 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fast.
Yeah, it's faster than before.
Yes.
There's actually some analysis that someone's done on like the speed of provisioning like AKS clusters versus GKE and Amazon and things like that. Like it was definitely rough, I think, our averages like before, like 6 months ago, but we've been working really hard on our infrastructure to make it stable. We've been holding off on like creating new features in AKS, which might make some customers kind of upset, but in reality, we want to make sure we're putting out the best service out there. So
is it ready now?
I would say it's getting definitely to a stable state. Yeah, I think like every day it's like pushing it further and further. But yeah, I think in the past 6 months it's dramatically improved. I think like sometimes like clusters were really sporadic, so they would take like 20 to 30 minutes to create, but now we're getting a constant kind of rate of like 7 minutes. Okay. So
I've got a question on Kubernetes itself. You know, an AKS, can you do mixed Windows and Linux clusters?
Not yet.
Not yet, but that's coming, right?
It is coming. It's actually like definitely really high on our list of things. The reason why you can't do it yet is that because we haven't enabled this concept of agent pools, and possibly a virtual node would actually go into that experience in the future too. But this will allow you to create even different like VM types in your cluster. So today, if you create a cluster, they all are the same VM type. They're all the same OS, and you can't like mix them up. So a lot of people are like, why can't I add this different SKU like into my cluster and things like that? But in the future with these agent pools, you'll be able to like have an agent pool with this SKU and an agent pool that's Windows and one that's maybe just virtual nodes. And then you also can span those across availability zones.
So you would have a virtual node for Linux and a virtual node for Windows, for instance. Yes. I see. Because previously, the Azure Container Service that's now depreciated supports mixed node, but then the difference between AKS and ACS is you manage your own VMs versus Microsoft manages the VM for you, right?
Yes.
But what about customers that really need to do it now? You know, what's the options of maybe migrating from their own managed to Kubernetes? Will that be possible, you know?
Yeah, so we have this product called Azure Container Service Engine, ACS Engine, and it's where all of our like new features are going into, and then AKS takes those bits and then we push those out. But ACS Engine is something you can deploy yourself. So
it's like an ARM template, basically.
Yeah, you can create this template of like what kind of VMs you want, what OS you want. So you can use Windows, for example. And so you can get your own Windows cluster. So it's just a little bit harder because then, you have to manage like the masters, you have to manage the agents in there. We don't really, and we're also depreciating that product. So in a year, we're not going to support it anymore.
The actual ACS
engine? Well, not ACS Engine. Sorry. ACS Engine is just like open source bits. You can pull that.
Okay.
That's not something we necessarily support anyway, but like, of course, if there's a bug, we're going to fix it because it goes into AKS. So like that project is stood up. It's just you have to manage everything yourself. ACS, as you were talking about before, is the one we're depreciating, where we made it a little bit easier to deploy a Kubernetes cluster versus a DCOS cluster. Yeah.
So using ACS Engine from scratch, I can do my own cluster, but then I have to take care of it, right? Can I then do virtual nodes on that?
Yes, but I guess, and that's like kind of, I think where people will get confused too, is like virtual node itself is maybe the experience that we've built for AKS, but you would actually have to create, like go through the virtual kubelet docs to create a virtual kubelet that would work for the ACS Engine cluster, because we don't actually make it easy for you there. We do have a command line that will like create the pod, and we need to check if it'll work on ACS Engine. I'm not too sure. We had built it for AKS. But yeah, so you have to deploy it yourself. You have to deploy basically the pod yourself.
Okay.
But we try and make it easy. We have a lot of instructions. I can show you that, kind of what it takes to do it yourself. So for example, if you were using like a GKE cluster and you wanted to use a virtual kubelet that was the Azure provider, so you could spin out to ACI from GKE, you would go here. So this is where you start. There's a bunch of things here, and you can't use, and that's another confusing thing here, this quick setup with the ACI connector only works with Azure, and I need to double check if it works with ACS Engine. I assume it would. I just want to like double check that. But it wouldn't work for GKE. It wouldn't work for things that aren't Azure, because we're taking in Azure bits and making sure you're signed into your Azure subscription and things like that, and taking your service principal bits and like adding that in. So that would be different in GKE. You would have to manually do it yourself, because we wouldn't have AKS to go after for all of those variables. So this is kind of the setup that it takes for like the Azure stuff you need to do. The quick setup, well, you can't really do that with GKE. You would have to do the manual setup, create the service principal, export all of these variables. Yeah. So if you guys find bugs with this, let me know too.
Okay. Yeah, that's That's a challenge accepted.
Yeah, it's a lot of, and the VNet, I think it's extra hard because now you have to create all of this stuff. A VNet range, a cluster subnet range, ACI subnet range, and this is all like, you have to just know the ranges. I mean, you can use ours, but
I think that's a bit above my understanding of things, so I just keep on doing .NET stuff. So technically, as a customer using ACS Engine to provision my own VM, taking care of my own VM to run Kubernetes, whenever a mixed cluster specifically now. Later on, when it goes on GA, mixed clusters and AKS, will it be possible just to change my configuration connection to AKS, and then it will work? Or what is the migration?
You mean for virtual Kubelet?
Well, for the whole cluster, I want to kill my old cluster and just point it to the new one, and then it was
like
just
moving your workloads over from the old cluster to the new one.
Yes. Will it be something like a Helm chart or something that?
Yeah, like I would assume that if all of your stuff is just in Helm charts, it's easily reproducible. So it's just going to take a command to spin it back up. But that migration plan is something that I know some other PMs in our team have been thinking about a lot. So if anyone has is going through that migration process, we do have people that will help you. And they have best practices and things like that for the best way to migrate. Like Windows workloads is a huge one because Windows workloads are usually more in depth than the Linux ones that we see. They're bigger. So I know there's a migration plan out there. I'm not the one working on it, so I don't know the details. I actually try and stay away from Windows. But there's definitely we will definitely help you. For example, the virtual node preview that we have here, we do have virtual node does work with Windows. You just have to get 2 virtual nodes, like you said before. But we didn't actually put it in our preview. So here you only get the Linux one through this experience. Because we don't have VNet support for Windows, so we didn't want it to get confusing.
Yes, okay. So for the guys that don't know what Helm is, it's a package manager for AKS, right?
For any Kubernetes cluster.
For any Kubernetes cluster.
Yeah, it's open source.
Okay. The NuGet for clusters.
Yeah, it's in the CNCF as a project, and it actually used to be hosted under Kubernetes itself, but the team decided to move it under the CNCF. Okay,
I think 7 minutes is past, way past now. Is it done provision now?
Oh, the cluster, yeah. So I actually had one that was pre-baked, just so we could see it. So I went ahead and I did kubectl get nodes, and now we can see that we have this extra node up here, and then I have the 2 other nodes that I had asked for. Yeah, I made this last night, so it's basically the same thing. And before, I hadn't even pressed create because I don't want to create a million clusters. I already have 2. Yeah. So I didn't even try to create it. The validation passed, though, so this is a valid template that someone can use. But I also went ahead and deployed a pod. So I just want to show you guys where it's running and then show you what an example of what you would be able to run and how it works.
Get PO.
Yeah, get pod. I shouldn't use shorthand, but
yes,
yeah, that's just
1 letter.
Yeah, it's just 1 letter shorter. Makes all the difference.
What is that on yearly basis? I mean, come on.
Yeah. A lot of time. 10 minutes.
You only
4 seconds.
You only got so many keystrokes left.
Yeah. So I'm not going to go to this Nginx site, but you can see that it's running, and it's actually running on virtual node, which is pretty cool. So I didn't ask for a public IP. It actually got a private one, which is pretty great. And yeah, that's it. That's all I had to do. But let me show you what it means from a perspective of how do I actually get my workloads to deploy to Virtual Kubelet. Take the same workloads you have. Keep in mind there's some features that we haven't made support for yet, like liveness probes and readiness probes is a big one that we haven't supported yet. We haven't supported a couple other things, but go through our issue tracker, and I'm also going to put it up in our README.
I like your theme for VS Code.
Oh, thank you. It's purple. Yeah. It's like purple and white. Do people usually do dark? Is that why?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, most of the coders is dark and,
Yeah, even my terminal actually is like purple.
Yeah.
I think I always like put like purple on everything. It was one of my favorite colors growing up. Like my room was purple, maybe too purple. So yeah, everything is just really purple. Okay, so this is the Nginx pod that I created. And basically, this is the important stuff, this node selector. So before it used to be different. Before we made you go in and like copy the actual node name and put that in here to say like, I want to spin out to this virtual kubelet node or this virtual node. But now it's actually pretty easy to just copy and paste this. And as long as virtual node's running in your cluster, you don't have to do anything extra. You can just copy and paste this into your pod specs. So all we're saying is go to the Linux one. We could change this to Windows. And if there was a Windows virtual node in the cluster, which we don't have yet, but if you did get there, if you have virtual kubelet that's provisioned with Windows, it would actually spin out to that instead. So it's just easy to change that tag.
So I see for this specific Nginx container, it tells it that it needs to deploy this to a Linux virtual kubelet, basically.
Yeah, like you would need to know like what, and that's one thing too, like you still need to understand like what your pods run on. I think that's something in the future, which would be really cool if we could like understand what these pods were, and maybe someone's working on this, where like this is actually a Linux workload and this is Windows, and you would just say deploy it, and then you wouldn't have to deal with this.
Ooh.
But today you do, and even in normal Kubernetes you do. Like
maybe something in the image, if it's a specific build for Linux or Windows. That's actually a good idea.
Yeah, that would be really cool. I think that's like another, probably like a startup could make that, right? Like looking into these images and figuring out like what OS, so you don't have to figure it out, or even GPUs or different SKUs, like what's the most efficient way to run these pods, because that's something we run up against all the time is efficiency. Because another big problem of why like we built ACI is people are generally not efficient with provisioning their clusters. They over provision all the time, and it makes sense. Like you want to make sure you have extra space rather than less space. But when you're doing that, you have to think about, what is my pod spec actually doing? What is my code doing? Is my code efficient? Is my pod spec efficient? Here, I don't give it any requests or resources to use. I don't say like you can use up to 2 cores or 1 core. I just kind of let it default itself. So it will default into ACI, and it'll be like, you get 1 core and you get this amount of memory, but that might be too much for this pod. So,
and do you need to specify a type? What happens if I leave it out?
Oh, this type?
Yes.
Yeah, it won't get scheduled to VK. I might get scheduled to another Linux VM, but it's not going to get scheduled to VK. This toleration, so yeah, the node type is VK. So it'll look for that no matter what provider it is. It's going to look for the virtual kubelet node type. But this toleration tells us like what provider we want to use. And this one's Azure. So every Azure virtual node has a thing called a taint, which basically says, if I have this taint, you can only schedule to me if you have a key to like unlock me to be able to get scheduled. So that's what this key means, is you are allowed to get scheduled to that ACI virtual node. And that's it. And like, it doesn't mean that this pod will get scheduled there. It doesn't mean that until you have this node selector. So this says, definitely you have to schedule me to this node. If it's not there, don't schedule me. If you just had, like if we deleted this, for example, and you just had this, it might go on to like a Linux VM, which is fine too.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
It would be cool if it's inferred, but it's a bit more tricky because let it run over to the VM, and if the VM starts to sort of become wonky, then it needs to burst out automatically.
Yeah, and that's what like Kubernetes kind of will do for you. It'll reschedule pods. Like if, for example, the pod doesn't have enough resources on the VM, like it'll go up and like reschedule you to virtual node. You also can use a thing called a node affinity to say prefer the VMs in my cluster and don't prefer virtual kubelet or virtual node. But But if those are full, then go ahead and burst out. So that's like an easy way to be able to burst out, and something you can pick off the shelf and just install, like this node affinity.
Cool.
I can show that to you guys too. So this is one of our Flasher demos that we have. There's some videos on it too. If you go to YouTube and you type in like virtual node autoscale, it might come up, or Corey Sanders or Lockie. Those are the people that were doing the demo. But basically, we use these things. This is the toleration it's talking about, but we use these node affinities in this demo. So we kind of show you how you can continue to provision that one VM in your cluster and like spin out to it, but then automatically spin out to ACI when it doesn't have enough space.
Okay.
It's an anti-affinity. So kind of cool. Because it's third scheduling, during scheduling, nor during execution.
Is it maybe this is a stupid question, but is it at all possible to hook AKS onto the Azure Event Grid? Or like
I think so. Yeah, like I haven't looked into Event Grid too much myself. Like what's a scenario like you would want to use, for example?
Well, if something happens on Azure, I don't know which is exactly what it's scenario, but maybe something DevOpsy, and I need to, for instance, I don't know, deploy a pod on.
Yeah, like it basically like triggers these pods depending on like an event that happens, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure either we're building support for it, but I've definitely seen it in our and we've also been working on this with ACI. Definitely seen it in our tracker somewhere. So that's another thing. If people are curious, I can go back to the PMs on our team.
Okay.
And I guess it's important to make a distinction on like what I do now. We like kind of split our team into two different sections. So we split it into like services for like AKS and ACI and virtual node and things like that are kind of service side. And then we have another side, which is basically like the upstream community projects, which Kubernetes as a whole goes into that, like virtual kubelet goes into that. For example, Knative goes into that. So that's the side I actually work on.
I see.
Rather than the services, I'm not the one anymore. Like I did build with engineers and other PMs, I did build like the virtual kubelet or the virtual node preview in AKS, but that's probably one of the last things I'm going to do with that project. I'm actually going to be moving off it. So tear, but
sad panda.
Sad, but yeah, it's exciting for like what I get to do
Exactly.
now.
Exactly.
So I'm going to be moving on.
Do we have any other questions, guys?
No, not at this time.
No,
It's
not
very
really.
complex stuff, so.
I'm just like screen sharing doubly. Okay.
No, that's amazing. I've seen that bursting videos. You guys should really go check it out. We will maybe put the link in the show notes to link there. It's yeah. I say it again. Like the use cases for this, it's amazing. For what you can do with the ACI bursting things. And how hard is it to build your own virtual kubelet? Is there some kind of workshop or
like
demo
from,
you did
oh
before?
yeah,
From scratch?
there is a workshop. So we've been putting on workshops like right before KubeCon we had one, and a lot of people came out to learn how to build their own provider. Also at KubeCon during the deep dive session, we go through like, well, so there's a couple things. Like, do you want to build your own virtual kubelet that connects up to like Domino's or like?
No,
like,
I was just
people
thinking.
have done that.
Really? Tell us more.
Yeah, so someone in the last workshop, and I think they were from Microsoft, but they were just messing around, and they were basically connecting the Domino's APIs to the interface that we have in Virtual Kubelet. And so anytime you like created a pod and maybe you had something in your pod spec, it would go to like the closest Domino's store and like order you pizza, which I thought was amazing. I love Domino's. So like you can really do anything with this.
I suppose the implementation it's specific what you want to do. So if you deploy something, it can then like call an API, for instance.
Yep.
Tweet something. Yeah, that's actually a good idea.
Yeah, it's really easy to get started. I know that I had a conversation with the person that just built the HashiCorp Nomad provider, and he was like, yeah, it only took like a couple, like building a provider like wasn't that bad. I think the hardest part he said for him was like just getting the dev environment set up, which hopefully we're going to get some PRs on fixing the instructions for that to make it a little bit more clear. But otherwise, the actual like project itself and like coding and stuff, like coding in it, was really easy. It's very self-explanatory to like create a pod, delete a pod, and things like that.
And my question was more like to, you're asking a scenario. My question was more like, I want to build for instance, a Kubernetes local cluster that's running on my laptop or Raspberry Pi, and then make a connector that sort of bursts on-prem.
Yeah. You want to do the Azure one?
I don't know.
Do I?
I don't know. You're the expert.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? It depends on like where you as the user of Virtual Kubelet want to spin out to, because you could spin out to Fargate, because Amazon also is a provider for this. So since you're local, like it's not going to be easier or harder for you to spin out to any one of the providers depending on their setup. You're still going to have to get all the bits down for like connecting up to the cloud and like.
No, actually, mean
the whole thing.
Bursting to my Raspberry Pi.
Oh, you want to burst to your Raspberry Pi? Oh, yeah. We have, let's see. Someone's done that, and he did a 3-part series on it on a tech cast. I'm not screen sharing anymore, right?
No.
No.
Because the thing about scenarios where you have a cloud first scenario, but when the internet is offline, the guy's internal network can still sort of run.
Yeah.
It sort of falls back.
Yeah, so this guy, and we actually did a talk at Ready or an Ignite or something. Take a look at that. So it's this tutorial for orchestrating IoT Edge deployments. And I mean, he's using IoT Edge, but he also installed this on a Raspberry Pi. So let me figure out. He did like a 3-part series on it. Let's see.
Want to maybe share your screen again? I don't know if it's...
Yeah. Oh, it's because I looked up.
Link in.
I would honestly Google it. I think some people have done that. Just going into... Oh, shoot. That was my... Yeah, okay. Sharing my screen again. Oh, this is cool. Basics of Raspberry Pi. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So people have done it, and I think that's a great first part of this community project. Like, I don't have to have all the answers. These guys have the answer. So yeah, I would definitely get started. I think their instructions could probably improve. So go ahead and maybe go through this. Setting up Raspberry Pi. Just kidding. It's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. It's
That's
IoT Edge
cool.
on the Pi. So they're trying to install IoT Edge on it.
There's always someone have done it before.
So my Raspberry Pi doesn't even need to know anything about Kubernetes or nothing. It can just be a host, for instance, that something runs on.
Yeah, it doesn't need to have any knowledge of what a Raspberry Pi is. Definitely.
That's very
cool.
cool.
Or what Kubernetes is. Sorry, it probably knows it's a Raspberry Pi, maybe.
So you
Yes.
had to China last year? With the cloud open? Did you go?
Yeah, I spoke at that was actually a huge talk at LinuxCon in Beijing. That was kind of crazy. The room was packed. And I just went through like Virtual Kubelet and things like that. And we had a lot of comments from like Alibaba and some Chinese companies.
How big are these conferences in China?
The Chinese ones they're pretty big. I mean, I would say probably as big as like the ones we have here, a couple thousand, definitely. But it's definitely a different vibe, right? Like in Europe or in the Americas, it's like our culture is very different to Asia or like China. So it was really good to get exposed to that, to see like companies in China, like they understand all these products, and they're kind of the next frontier of getting to know Kubernetes and paving it for their clusters, and their use cases and things like that. So they're definitely like getting started. They're probably like maybe like a year-ish out from where we see like US customers and European customers, but definitely getting there. Plus it helps with the fact that a lot of us don't have like these products deployed in China, like in our Chinese regions. So that doesn't help them get to speed with these products. Like they want to have it in China for their customers. But it does help if they have customers abroad. So it's a trade-off.
This is actually a very good bridge to our event section. Are there any Kubernetes or Docker or container events out there?
So many, yeah. I would say like it depends on like what you're trying to do, like your audience or like what you want to learn. The biggest ones, of course, are KubeCon, and it's really easy to get lost in those conferences. I think the first time I stepped in to KubeCon Austin, I was so overwhelmed. It was like my third, fourth month of working at Microsoft, and I just literally, excuse my language for this, but a sea of white guys. I was like, oh no, where am I? And I felt very like out of place. But I found like some of my teammates. I made some friends, and then now like going back to KubeCon is actually really exciting. That I get to see like faces that I know. I think the first time is just really overwhelming to figure out what you want to do. But there's also always like amazing talks by customers, by users using Kubernetes. And I think those are the most interesting ones. So like Uber did a keynote. One of my friends was on stage, Selena, and she killed it, and it was amazing. But I know like Chick-fil-A did a talk, and like, so those are, I think, the most interesting ones. There's always going to be talks by like Google and Microsoft. And like, I mean, I do those talks too. I don't think they're as interesting, but I don't think I'm the audience for that either. So there's KubeCon, but also there's a lot of smaller events. So like we have just within the community, within Virtual Kubelet, we have our own like weekly or bi-weekly meetings that you're welcome to join. We have offsites that include other people. So we might do an offsite for Virtual Kubelet in combination with Helm in Milan, maybe in a couple months. So I'm going to have like a day that's just Virtual Kubelet, so people can learn how to build their own provider. People can learn how to like use the Azure one or use a different one like Hashi's, and just like bring it in as a community. And we can talk about new ideas, kind of like we were talking about the pod resourcing and like how do you figure out like where to schedule. Like these are things we can start to talk about. And I think anyone and everyone is welcome. It's like a smaller setting to get to know people.
Is the Milan thing a official thing that's already
Not
planned?
yet. This is literally something we just like talked about.
But if it's official, do send us the details.
Yes.
And then we can add it to our show notes for the upcoming episodes. We can just feature there because Martin, we have a list of events that we showcase as well, right?
Yeah, we usually we do, and we put them on the list. But when we have guests, we mostly use the time for our guests. So
yes,
much more interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I think I collected a couple of links, especially. Let me share my desktop again. I found your socks video.
Yes.
And
DevOps and socks.
And the autoscaling videos.
Yeah.
And for instance,
yep.
What was it? The one with Hanselman.
With the Hanselman.
And we get the Hanselman in February in the Netherlands.
Yes.
Oh, nice. Awesome.
It's going to be packed.
It will be a big event. The GitHub sites like the Virtual Kubelet GitHub site, and what was there more? Oh, and that's a nice bridge to GitHub itself, because they had released their private repositories this week, unlimited for free. So there's no argument anymore to use GitHub for your private repository. So if you don't have DevOps, you can still use the GitHub. So I think you are seeing that they are merging into GitHub a bit into the direction that the DevOps is going.
But why would I, if Azure DevOps is free, why would I use GitHub for free?
Because I think there are a lot of people already in the GitHub space. So they try not to tend to move over to DevOps, I think. So if they merge the whole lot a little bit more.
And of course, there's a whole lot of features that are in, especially in the pull request space, that is available on GitHub, like doing code suggestions and automatically making a commit for that, and that's all kind of stuff that's not in Azure DevOps right now. So
I've signed up for that GitHub workflow thingy, and waiting my turn to get activated. Yeah. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I've seen it. I've not actually worked with it, but I've seen some video footage.
Get someone on the show to demo that to us. That's very quite cool.
I don't know, Phil Haagt. He seems to know something about that.
Hey, Ria, you know Phil, right?
Maybe.
Isn't he leaving GitHub or something, or would I've been mistakenly somewhere else?
No, he was. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So he joined Microsoft right whenever GitHub was acquired, and now he's leaving Microsoft and he's starting his own consulting kind of firm. Also,
probably take over that again as well.
Yeah. No, but this is more towards, I think, mentoring people as well, and I don't know, but he's a cool guy.
Wasn't he like the creator of NuGet or something?
Yeah, I think so.
I don't know if he thought it up, but he was at least at the cradle of it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, and another event that this week was CES, the hardware event. Not only hardware, obviously also some software thingies, but a lot of interesting stuff. What I heard is that they had really, because we tend to be an electric car show. They had more space of electric cars than the original auto show. So that's very interesting. But the other one was this one that Fanny found this week with it's a wooden thing on your wall, but there is, as you can see, there's a wire there, and if you just run it.
When you touch Mui, and
once there's some sort of display there.
Then we return to its natural form.
I mean, they've messed it up with a wire, I would say.
Yeah, but you put it in. You should break open your wall and put a wire in there. But it's probably more expensive than the other one, than the piece of wood. And another interesting thing was this one. Let me see. It's in my show notes somewhere. This one.
What?
Electronic litter box. Automatically cleans it.
Cool. Cats are already so easy. If you can't clean a litter box, like, what are you doing with your life?
It's like your smart little box.
Yeah.
Can you burst to the little box from AKS?
Yeah, I guess so. You can.
Every time I deploy my pod, I wanted to clean my cat's bowl.
Yeah.
Yeah, the reason I picked this one is because our first episode of the show, we had some guy from South Africa. It was, what's his name again, Fanny?
Gareth?
What guy from South Africa?
With he created some IoT thing with his toilet and in the cat.
Yeah, Peter Fouché.
Yeah.
So that was one of our first episodes.
Yeah, so he had trained his cat to do the thing on the real toilets, and he created the device to detect if there is some pressure on the what's it called, Fanny?
It uses a motion sensor. So if someone is in front of the toilet, it triggers that motion sensor, and then after so many minutes or so many seconds, it just flushes the toilet. So the idea is that, but it's point at the cat's height, for instance. So if and he trained his cat, and that's the moral of the story. He trained his cat to actually do its business in the toilet.
In the toilet. Oh wow! But yeah, I remember hearing about this.
The problem was the toilet doesn't flush, so he built something that flushes the toilet. That's like,
oh my god!
And when they moved houses, and obviously the cats had to train a new toilet, and he just had to apply the same technique to retrain him to new toilet, and it works. So it's amazing. Amazing what you can do with cats.
Cats. I'm not a fan of them myself, but
No, then am I. In any case.
Yeah, well, that's. I think we're around the hour at this time, and it was. I think it was very interesting to hear all about this, and there's a lot to learn.
Absolutely.
It was not just interesting; it was fantastic.
It was fantastic. Yes, indeed.
Thank you
for
very much
having
for
me.
joining us.
Yeah, thank you. This is fun.
Yeah, we need to find more of these interesting guests. And next week it's the 17th, and we will back up at 8:00 p.m. Dutch time, CET. What's the CET? Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so.
CET.
Yeah.
So thank you for attending our little show over here, and I'm sure some people like to see the video afterwards. And yeah,
Cool.
thank you. And we'll see the other guys next week.